Hello, welcome to this episode of Steelfur Speaks. Here today to do a deck list for the deck that I took to the 95th place at the first Pro Tour. Also, this deck was, did better than I particularly piloted it. This deck was also piloted to a 40 place finish. I think around 40th place by one of my friends who I also worked on this deck with. So, this deck has at least a certain amount of a pedigree in terms of performance. I also just piloted it to win a 30-person Pro Quest. First Pro Quest I did this season. Did quite well with it, and that's pretty exciting. So let's just quickly have a look at the deck, and we'll talk about strategies and things like that after we have done that. So, the list, so we can have a proper look at it. Let's bring up the sideboard. So, the list is what I would consider roughly to be the standard Prism core. You're running all of your auras, your parables, your Arclight Sentinels, your Genesis, your Merciful, your Odes. Interestingly, you're not running all of the auras. You've cut 3 Pierce Reality, just the blue ones, as blue auras aren't necessarily the best in every matchup. And really, if one is going to be missing, it kind of feels like Pierce Reality could be that one. And then you're running basically 2 packages. You're running this core deck, which basically includes all of your blues. And you might be questioning one of the blues that's included. I'll put it back in the deck. I think it was here. Oh, it seems to be missing. But there's 3 blue Impenetrable Belief here. Here they are, yeah. So you might be questioning that, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So you've essentially got 3 main packages here, right? You've got the core package of yellows with the heralds, the good heralds, the war tunes, the heralds of protection, and erudition, and miraging metamorph. You've got your aura package, which includes the genesises, mercifuls, odes, parables, and then you've got a fatigue package, sigil of solace, sink below, war tune, herald, etc. So your core actual of your deck is only really 43 cards. And really, your sideboard changes heavily depending on who you're playing against. So if we think about this deck, if you're sitting down against a Prism, you're basically going full heralds. Full auras. You're putting in the Genesis, the Mercifuls, the Odes, the Parables, the Prismatic Shields, etc. And against everyone, really, you're kind of doing that strategy, except against Chain. Against Chain, you're actually cutting as many cards as you possibly can to add in Impenetrable Beliefs, Fate for Scenes, Sigil of Solace, Sink Below, War Tune Herald, and all of the defense reactions. Because against Chain, we decided to go for a full fatigue-based strategy. And the reason for this is that you're running a very large event. Prism is able to keep their health up quite high, and also able to kill Ursa in one attack with a War Tune. So really, you're sort of in a situation where you're quite good at killing Ursa. You're quite good at keeping your health quite high and blocking as well. And you're very much in a situation where Chain has to play perfectly or get lucky in order to not get fatigued. Whereas you are happy just sitting there blocking, and lining up more blocks and getting things all right. So especially for a longer tournament where Chains are going to get tired, they're going to get tournament fatigue, they're going to get sort of those kind of issues, then you're happier playing the sort of fatigue list where it's much more likely that a Chain player is either going to banish badly or get a misplay or a mistake that's going to let you actually just fatigue them. Now, when I say fatigue, for those of you less familiar, I do literally mean just blocking your way through every single card in the Chain player's deck until they have no cards left in hand. They can't attack you anymore, and then they either die, they either give up, or you just hit them with heralds or something until they die. I don't mean like fatigue them a little bit until their reds are gone. I mean you're literally blocking as much as you can every turn to guarantee that they run out of cards. And if that isn't something you've done, I would recommend you test that before you take that to a big tournament, just because it can be a little daunting. You're not actually attacking your opponent. You're not actually advancing a strategy, in the same way that they are, but you are sort of trying to be optimizing your blocks and things like that. Against the other big sort of bugbear of the format, Starvo, your main tactic is just to put in all your auras, try and do what Prism normally does against Starvo, which is play Prismatic Shields, play auras. The one piece of spicy tech there is the Tome of Fiendal. Against Starvo, if they're not fusing every turn, or if they even miss a fuse, it is very, very easy to resolve Tome of Fiendal. If they just come in with something like not an Oakenold, it's very, very easy to resolve Tome and gain 6. You might think, well, Tome is not very good because I want to get Go again to attack with your auras and stuff. The whole point of Prism is not necessarily to attack with the auras every turn. 2 or 3 life dealt with an aura is not as big as getting aura presence on the board. So if you have a Tome of Fiendal and you have any yellow aura in your hand, you just use your Tunic counter, pay for the Tome, draw 2 cards, then you have a 6-card hand. You pitch most of the cards, you put out 2 auras. If you draw really well, you can get an Arclight Sentinel and something, or you can get 2 Parables or 2 Genesis. I played 2 Mercifuls earlier, and it really just gives you an edge on the board state, because Starvo has to keep up with the board state. And if you're drawing this and playing 2 yellow auras, and maybe you already have a Haze Bending or a Shimmers in play, it just means you're getting 3 auras ahead, which he can't deal with very easily in one turn, which then gives you time to build up some shields or any other sort of thing. Gives you a bit of time to get ahead. So Tome of Fiendal, very, very good into Starvo, but you leave it in just because it's a yellow into everyone else, and it does block for 2 if you need to. It's also quite good into chain as well. Like, if you just resolve this with a Tunic counter and gain, say, 2 life, and maybe you draw a defense reaction or a sigil, you're going to gain more life, you're going to have a defense reaction in Arsenal. It gives you lots of options. So don't be afraid to resolve this against chain. Even in the mirror, one of the things you're doing is fighting for control of board. If you can resolve one of these when they don't have any auras in play, then you can get 2 auras down and they haven't got any, and you can kind of claw your way back that way. So that's the main deck. The list will obviously be in the comments below. I'll be uploading the sideboard guide, which I have written up almost for Patreon soon, onto the Patreon. So if you want that level of detail, please do let me know, or subscribe and you can have that. Any questions about it, just let me know. The mirror, really, so in most matchups, you're running, equipment-wise, you're running Tunic and you're running Skullcap. Ironhide Gauntlet, obviously, for Starvo. Null Rune, obviously, for Chain and other Rune Blades. Crowd of Reflection is just for the mirror, because you want to get efficiency with your blue auras and use them to kill other people's blue auras. Tunic is just really good. And then the only thing I'll say is, like, you think a lot of these decks are like, oh, I need a specific plan for Lexi and things like that. You typically don't. You just run an aura build into them, build lots of board state they have to address, block well, and you can kind of get easy wins against a lot of decks. Well, not easy, but definitely sort of like not really difficult wins into a lot of the field, assuming you play well. So something like Katsu, for example, you just put out a load of auras. He still has to kill them with his Kodachis, which makes his turns a lot more inefficient. So you can kind of get those kind of wins. Against the Brutes, it's a bit difficult, but really all you want to do against the Brutes is put out enough auras that they feel like they have to roll very regularly to deal with them, and then just hope they roll badly. If they roll well, you're going to lose, but typically, if a Brute rolls, if you force him to roll 3, 4, 5 times, they're not going to roll well every single time, and you can kind of use that for your own advantage. Typically, this deck wants to go first. Your ideal first turn is basically 1 yellow, 1 blue aura. I've started off some games, I played an Arclight Sentinel and a Haze Bending. That's amazing. I've played a Merciful Haze Bending. That's also amazing. Haze Bending is generally amazing. But even if you just go like, Parable passing Mirage, or, Genesis passing Mirage, you're still saying to your opponent, here's 4 damage you can't deal to me next turn. And as long as you draw more auras, you actually will get an advantage, assuming they don't have a blink or a time snaps or something like that. You're going to get that advantage because you're going to play another 2, and then you've got 3 on the board, and then they can't deal with them as again. So, maybe then you get 4, and you kind of get that ramp up if you can get the doubles in there. And of course, if you have a Tunic counter at the right time, you can always pitch a blue to play a Genesis with a Tunic counter, trigger the Genesis effect on their turn, tick up your Tunic again. There's loads of little ways to optimize this deck. So before we wrap up, I just want to talk about what this deck is for. So this deck is for a heavy, definitely I would say the Pro Tour meta. The only reason I played it into my Pro Quest is that I didn't really have time to change it, and it did do well in certain matchups. What you have to think is that this deck is very, very good into a field where there's going to be a lot of chains and a lot of Starvos. There are ways to optimize the match a bit more into Starvo, but like by adding in, say, library and drawing it early, or by adding in some more sort of defense reactions or something like that. But generally, if you're playing a lot of Starvos, this list is kind of okay, because you're going to put in your Sync Belows and you're going to play your Tomes, and you're just going to try and get lots of auras. And if Starvo high rolls you, he high rolls you. There's not much you can do about that. So, but if if there's lots of chains in the field as well, then you've got your fatigue matchup out. You're going to be able to fatigue a lot of them. It's going to be kind of comfortable. this matchup starts to, this list sort of starts to run into problems when there's a lot of mirrors in the field. It's not as good into the mirror as the list that runs all of the blue auras and more of the like fractals and the red attacks. And also, you know, where there's a lot of Briar, it's not very good into Briar. But also sort of not really into fields where there's just a lot of random decks. Like it's got a decent matchup into Lexi and a decent matchup into Katsu. But you know, if you're running to a lot of random Reinars and stuff like that, this list is not the most optimal list you can play for Prism. So just bear that in mind. This list is very much a meta call for the Pro Tour. It did win at my Pro Quest, but that's because I played 2 Chains, 3 Starvo games, you know, 1 Mirror, 1 Katsu, you know, and one Levia who I got quite lucky against because he just rolled really badly. So like, you know, I got very lucky in my pairings to pair up against the deck that this deck was made to beat, which means that I definitely dodged the Pro Quest bullet. But if you come up against too much random stuff in a Pro Quest, this list could not be for you. But then if your meta is loads of people who just want to play Chain and Starvo because that's what the good deck is, then you could take this deck. I will say, you know, if you've got reps with Prism, that's a bit better. I wouldn't necessarily take this in if I don't have Prism. I would look at maybe one of the other lists. Not really like Unmovable, but if you look at the latest lists from the Calling, you know, and stuff like that, did the top 8 and the top 8 in the Pro Tour. Like this top 8 list from the Pro Tour is actually very, very solid. It runs all of the auras. It runs lots of heralds, so you can switch strategies quite a bit. It runs Unmovable. I don't like Unmovable, but everyone seems to have played it who did well, so maybe they're right and I'm wrong. Okay, this guy didn't play Unmovable, but I would look at one of these lists if you're less sure on the meta you're going to play in. Just take something that's a bit more generic Prism, because remember that one of the strengths of Prism that this list gives up is the aura density. Is the herald density. It's only actually running, I think, like 10 heralds. So, an erudition, which you're never going to cut, whereas other lists have like 20 or so. So it's very tricky for this list to pivot away from auras and win sort of racy matchups if it starts to be a race. Whereas a lot of these lists have a lot more heralds in, so they have a lot more reach and ability to actually switch into a more aggressive attacking standpoint, right? So you kind of need to be just aware of that. You know, if a herald game is what's happening in your local meta, you kind of need to be playing that sort of game. Anyway, that's it. I hope you like this list. Obviously, I'm happy to be sharing it with everyone. I think it's very exciting. You know, and I was really happy to do it, and I'm really happy to have my Pro Tour invitation locked for the second Pro Tour in France. It's going to be super hype. I've already bought my tickets and my train. I am, of course, still trying to get in to cast it, but it's good to be qualified just in case they decide to go with something else or something else happens. But, you know, it's going to be pretty exciting. And, you know, if you do well with this deck list and event, or you play it into Chain and you smash him, do let me know in the comments. I think it's really cool, and I think it's really good to be able to share it with everyone.